This is a great question, right? Can you attract a partner, a proper partner, before you're healed? Yes and no. And I'm saying yes and no because, of course, there's an understanding that as long as you have unexamined pieces, these unexamined pieces will show up in anything you do, money, health, partnership, right? Whatever, your unexamined stuff is always with you. There's some people who believe that relationship is kind of a crucible for healing. I think that's a very dangerous idea because it commodifies your partner into something that they shouldn't have to be, right? And it also commodifies the relationship into something that has conflict and hardship and needs constant attention, which is where a lot of people really get off on the idea that they get together and then they bring out the worst in each other, and that then becomes the catalyst for healing, and then they can dig in and all of that. That's one style of doing it, but it's extremely hard on the nervous system to pick a partner for healing. Right. However, do you have to wait to attract the partner till you're healed? Absolutely not. Right. Otherwise, good luck. You'll be like Granny, because we are never healed, right? And there's always something else. So I would say the answer is you want to take care of let's say, the roughest edges, obviously, right? So if you have something that will make you attract somebody who will reenact your childhood patterns that were extremely toxic, it might be a good idea to address that before you attract another partner, right? That becomes fairly apparent 2 or 3 people of the same ilk in, right? Everybody can have a tough go once, but if you have 2 or 3 people who pretty much present the same symptoms, so to speak, then it's probably a good idea to look at that before you go back out. But at the same time, once you have pinpointed what it is that you tend to do, you can very actively work against that in your attraction, right? So you have like a no list, essentially. You know exactly the things that will show up in you or a partner because of that thing. And then when you start, dating or things like that, you look for that specifically and go, there it is. And then, of course, the tough part is that most people go, oh, there it is. It's not that bad. Oh, I know how that goes. I'm not going to fall into the same thing again. And then bam, you're in there. That which is healthy for us is not nearly as attractive. It's a potato chip phenomenon, right? If you have the choice between a healthy salad and a bowl of potato chips, yeah. So I would say proceed with caution, but proceed, because there's no time to waste, in the sense that, if you want to be in a relationship, you might as well be in relationship and then work stuff out from there, with the few caveats of having dealt with it, with the worst of it, and then understand that it's not your partner's job to straighten you out, and it's not your job to straighten your partner out. So you're essentially asking, does the female body have different requirements as far as both the receiving and the releasing? Yes and no is the answer. So the first thing I want to say about the releasing and the different ways to work with it. So you have a very specific thing, right? Meaning you have a kind of a frozen shoulder or a very extremely painful shoulder. So, and it's on the left. So you're going, what is this about, right? So there's a few ways you can look at it. One of the ways you can look at it is from the viewpoint of, let's say, injury, right? So meaning you might have injured something, right? That's one way of looking at it. And then how you ascertain that is you get it looked at. You know that you've done something, right? You laid on it very hard for a long, whatever. I'm making this up, but you've done something actually, let's say, technical. I don't know what the word would be, structural to your shoulder that now causes pain, right? So that's one option. We could also look at, are there habit patterns in your body that cause certain contraction that over time cause chronic tension that then when the tension rises over a certain level, cause injury and then pain, right? Which is more likely the case since you don't have any memory of the actual injury. And it seems to lessen when you treat it, and then it comes back when you don't pay attention, so to speak. So we could assume, and I'm saying this from a somatic lens and not as a healthcare practitioner, of course, but doctor would have to, But if we look at it from a somatic lens, we can look at there being something in the way you sit or when you push or, when you clench during work and stuff like that, that made it such that you have a contraction pattern that over time accumulates into even inflammation and then a pinched nerve and, all of that kind of stuff, right? So then what you would look at is two kinds of release, so to speak. The release of the immediate excess tension, of course, the calming down of the inflammation and injury, which you did with medication, right? Then the essentially straightening out and manipulating the area with massage, right? So those are the kind of acute taking care of the injury pattern. And then at the same time, you can look at what's the pattern underneath there and release that both by counteracting behavior patterns and nonlinear, where you release the underlying, let's say, imprint. So all of those things have to be done at the same time, so to speak. Otherwise, you release the stuff in nonlinear, but you still have the bodily pattern, so it constantly loads back up. And I'm doing this because that's my particular one. I have a thing that when I get really stressed, my right shoulder goes forward, and it's like, I'm pushing against the rock. It's like literally like it feels like I'm shouldering up to something heavy. And that's caused huge pain at some point, and I had to really deal with it and do all the things I'll tell you about, but counteract the movement when I catch it. And notice that when that happens, I'm above capacity, right? So I have to essentially go, oh, there's that thing. That means I've gone above capacity. I'm going to step away, need to de-escalate, I need to do some nonlinear, I have to have a hot bath, whatever, cup of tea, and take my foot off the gas. And then I can also dismantle the tension pattern that's underneath. So you do everything. And so the release essentially happens on many different levels. And the key, though, is that you essentially don't just, bail out the leaking boat with a leaky bucket, where you essentially like, bailing. It always comes water in. You can't get enough water out. You're on this equilibrium, which is how a lot of us approach stress relief, right? We're like always just doing enough so we're okay again, but it never goes to zero because the boat's leaky and the bucket is leaky. So that's pretty much how most of us operate, right? And that's why we started this event with looking at like leaky buckets, and leaky boats. So that you at least know where the leaks are in your buckets and boats. So that all said, that's, I think, the same for men and women alike, doesn't make any difference. Now, when it comes to receiving, for all human beings, men and women alike, we have a few procedures we can apply that work. One of which is, if you have less tension in the system, you have more space, right? That's fairly straightforward. Hence, we did some relaxation. Particularly if you have a lot of relaxation, a lot of tension in the pelvic floor, that pulls your energy up. You just don't have as much capacity, physical capacity to operate, to receive, but also just to generate, right? So relaxation is the same for men and women everywhere, right? But then specifically because we have openings, that men don't have, so to speak, both actual physical openings, but also the related emotional disposition, unless they have experimented with sexual modalities in which they had to open themselves, right? Most men don't actually break their energetic integrity when they have sex. But as women, right, if we want to let somebody in our body, that requires that we essentially open our energetic field and open our body, right? And that's one and the same. And then, of course, with that also comes an emotional disposition, because you have to, and if you are, let's say, built in a healthy way, you have to ascertain trust, give a certain amount of surrender, give permission, then actively participate, right? So there's an entire set of circumstances that, when we talk sexual opening, that also apply to receiving. And, by the way, conceiving, right? So receiving, conceiving, and the sexual aspects are the same, because it requires that kind of, that opening beyond like a boundary, so to speak. So, which is why there very often is an emotional disposition that gets triggered by having actual penetrative sex. Because you have to open yourself, not only physically, but energetically and emotionally. And then we're all gaga about some dude who just did the thing, right? Is one way of saying it, not quite as crassly. And it's like, oh, this is nice, it feels good. Let me, do the thing. And you're like, oh, I'm receiving you, and then guy moves on, and you're like, what happened? Where are you? Right? We've all been there. And that's an energetic disposition thing. Now, I want to say that particularly nowadays, there's a lot of people who have essentially hardened themselves against that dynamic, for better and for worse. That's not up for discussion. Who can, kind of proceed as if that's not happening. But if you are sensitive, and if that's your focus, which is the opening, the receiving, the taking in, the inviting in, that's a disposition, right? And that disposition, you can, let's say, approximate from your, let's say, sexual receptivity. So we could say that if you're a woman, that is where you would bring your attention when you're receiving. Now, if you're a man, because we have men in the room, right? The invitation comes through the heart a bit more than through the opening in the body, so to the energetic opening in the body. But men also have and this is, I think, one of the things that has gotten very lost in all these horrible gender wars, is that men are actually very deeply feeling and very sensitive, but there isn't a lot of space for that. So very often at a very young age, that kind of stop to the heart space happens. and also through the attack of, you're just a dude doing the thing. There is a lot of there's a lot of stopping that thing. So if we look at the male body, we would still have to look at and this is very often you can see this, right? The opening of this space here, because that's how the heart gets protected. When you're constantly told how wrong you are and how toxic and how whatever, you are going to have this contraction, and that contraction, of course, also causes physical problems or whatever. So it's the receiving is the opening. It's also true for us, but we also have, kind of a more lower body opening. While physiologically, men tend to have a lot more thrust in the lower body. Thrust, I'm not just talking sexual, but like forward motion. But the heart is where it then sits, the inviting through the heart, the softening this, the letting it in, which is hard, the same way it's hard for us sexually, right? Because we get hurt.